UFOs.
Good evening, Stephen.
Ghosts. Ancient civilizations. The supernatural. We may never know the truth about what's really going on, but it sure is fun to speculate.
This is Factor Theory Live with your host, Stephen Crawford.
Welcome to the show, everybody. I am here with somebody I've been listening to and watching for a long time. I got a lot of respect for this man. He started something called the Paradigm Research Group, among other things, and I don't want to risk messing up anything that he's done, so I'm going to let him tell it as I ask the question. Stevens, how are you doing tonight?
It's great to be with you, Stephen. Plus, I'm pleased that you spell your name the correct way.
I know, right? And so many people call me Stefan, and it's annoying.
That's Eastern Europe maybe, but not the U.S.
Right. If I was in Europe, I'd get it. But
good to be with you.
Okay. So, what was it? Actually, we'll get into your because I wanted to ask a question, which is basically going to give you the chance to lead into your bio. What was the thing that made you go, holy crap, that blew my mind, and this is what I'm going to do with my life?
That's not quite it.
Okay.
I began when I was a teenager. I was noticing these articles appearing on the quote UFO issue, and they were interesting. How could they not be? I vividly remember reading I think it was the Look magazine article on Betty and Barney Hill.
Right.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah. And
I was basically interested in sci-fi and read all the books. I was no chance I was going to become an English lit major. So as the years go by, I mean, I'm paying attention. And just based on what came across my radar back then, from, say, maybe 15, that would have been 61 on, it was clear to me that the phenomenon was extraterrestrial. It's obvious. One didn't have to be a rocket scientist or have them land in your backyard. But so what, right? I had plenty to worry about at the time.
Yeah.
So it's there. It's like it's a worldview issue. It's sitting there, but I'm doing other things. I just don't focus on it. But the issue, of course, never went away. The phenomenon never went away. And there was always something turning up all those years. Right. So what happened in 1995, I sort of reached a point in life where I was wholly dissatisfied with how things were going. They weren't going well. And I just really wasn't doing anything that meant anything to me. And I decided that what attracted me in terms of a core activity or purpose was activism. I had dabbled with it when I was younger, but I did not throw myself into it. But at the age of 49, I said, well, what have I got to lose? And then I said, okay, activism, political activism. What? And for whatever reason, there was a reason. The idea of linking political activism to the extraterrestrial issue emerged as I was reading John Mack's book, Abduction.
Okay.
Plus I knew about some of the problems he'd had at Harvard. And this was a milestone thing for a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, well, with a stellar career and huge credentials, Pulitzer Prize, all that, to be formally engaging the contact issue.
Right.
Was huge. And for me, it was a milestone. So it occurred to me that the issue had arrived at a point where it could become a true political issue. So what to do? And I got lucky. I was able to convince John Mack's organization in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to let me come and volunteer for them. And I was in California at the time. I was amazed that this worked out. And I just sold everything off. I didn't have much. Packed up the car and drove cross country. Came through Roswell. Spent a day there, and ultimately ended up in Cambridge. And worked as a volunteer about 4 months. It was extremely interesting. Very stimulating. exciting. It was like getting a really nice push in a bobsled race, right? So
Right.
It was while I was at. So still, this was not final destination. I knew that, and it was while I was up in Cambridge that it sort of came to me. Okay, what next? And it really just hit me like a flash. I knew Washington. I'd lived there on and off for years. Had family there, going way back all the way to the 30s, and I'd gone to school there, some summer school. I knew it. I'd been around. And I had a place to stay because I had relatives there. So I said, what if I were to go to Washington? And this is, I'm thinking about this late May of 1996. I'm sorry. Late May of 96. I said, what if I went to Washington, set up an office in the house there and registered as a lobbyist on the extraterrestrial issue? Seemed simple, right?
Right.
And I go, okay. And then it occurred to me, pretty likely that nobody ever has. Okay. And I know that the lobbying registrations are followed. They're covered. The newspaper checks them. They don't necessarily do articles on every one, but they want to know who's registering as a lobbyist because sometimes that's the story, right?
Yeah, this is very cool, dude.
You see where this is going, right? I'm thinking, okay, I'll bet that'll get some attention. Because remember, I'm cold. I'm literally entering cold on this. I have no background. I say I have no. There's no awareness of who I am or what I am. I have some knowledge. I'd spent about 6 months. I was reading and watching a lot of stuff. But
how old were you at this point? Like late 20s, early 30s?
49.
49 at the point you decided, what the hell, let's go for it.
Yeah, midlife crisis.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, sometimes better late than never.
Yeah.
And so I signed up as a lobbyist, and lo and behold, it wasn't that long. The Washington Post sent out a reporter, interviewed me in my office, and I ended up with a very large front page business section article, which I, of course, have up on my website, which was about what I was doing. It was probably the first article published in the Washington Post ever about activism associated with the extraterrestrial issue. And that was it.
Activism in Washington.
Well, yeah, there's plenty of activism in Washington, but not about extraterrestrials. Actually, I may be wrong about that because there was an organization called Right to Know that just prior to my coming on board actually did some picketing or protesting, marching in front of the Capitol. Not the Capitol, but the White House with signs and so forth. And I think they did get written up. So I think that would have been the first article, but certainly the first article about a lobbyist. And I registered on behalf of a number of organizations, pro bono, of course. There's no money there, and that's where the name Paradigm Research Group came from. And then that was it. From there, I had a platform on which to move ahead one way or another. And it's 23 years later and 24 years later almost, and still pursuing the same thing I started, which was end the truth embargo. It's a movement, a political truth movement to end the truth embargo on the ET issue by the U.S. government. And I didn't think it would take 24 years, but that's the way history goes sometimes.
Yeah. It's pretty nuts, the way they're jangling keys and just throwing one thing after another off at us to just keep us away from that tech. Because look, your phone, you go buy a phone and like a few months later, they've got a new one coming out, So for us to sit here and just be expected to believe this and stay in this paradigm, it's nuts. And I think that's why Gary McKinnon actually started losing it too, and found the things that he found, because there was a lot of people in Britain and the UK in general that just seniors that couldn't afford to either you could eat or pay for heat, and he was looking for free energy. Is that that's correct, isn't it? Or
I think it was he was looking for UFO stuff. I mean, I've read articles about him. He was looking for UFO stuff, and I think he was focused on NASA, and he found some things. I'm somewhat surprised that more successful hacking attempts did not occur. It's possible that there were some that penetrated, but they got headed off at the pass.
Right.
But and it's also possible that there were hacking attempts. Well, that the Chinese and the Russians or the Soviets hacked systems and got information related to ET stuff. But of course, they're not going to divulge that to our newspapers. And it's also possible WikiLeaks may have gotten some. Julian Assange was asked about this directly, and he kind of blew the question off. My gut feeling is if WikiLeaks had gotten anything significant directly from government files, real intense stuff, that they might have sat on it because they have their own credibility problem. Right. But we do know that when they released the Podesta files, which was in 2016, which was a political act. It wasn't like, oh, wow, you need to know all this. No, this was he hated Hillary Clinton and he wanted to help her lose. So they released all the Podesta files just before the election. There were all these UFO-related files in there related to Podesta and Tom DeLonge. Right. But, yeah, they've been getting files for years. And so who knows? But Gary McKinnon right now, not Snowden, is the one guy who apparently hacked in and got something that smelled like extraterrestrial stuff inside one of the NASA files.
Since you brought him up, what's your opinion on Snowden and the little tidbits that he's tossed out from time to time?
I don't know how many things he's tossed out. I think he's tossed out a lot. He left with a vast amount of thoughts. Snowden is part of a movement that is it's not fully formed, that's for sure.
Right.
Very tough one to form. And it's the movement addresses two things: abuse of secrecy and surveillance. This is really tough to deal with. Every attempt to get anywhere in those two issues, in what we'll call a very meaningful way, has been difficult. The odd hearing that tended not to go anywhere, the occasional bill, the secret empire, as I like to call it, which is the intelligence component of all of the various entities in government, was established and dug deep because of the Cold War and because of the ET issue. The people that created it and designed it and maintained it were quite committed to the secrecy and to whatever it took to maintain it for national security reasons. And as a result, we have been denied that information. At the same time, once the empire was formed and once they had the tech, that's a whole lot of power, and it was difficult not to abuse it. And so surveillance, intrusions, and so forth, in extremis, which obviously included overseas intelligence, but also in the United States, became part of our lives. And nobody in Congress and no president has any significant effect on it. So, in fact, I noted that Daniel Moynihan, who was a very, very highly respected senator, was dying. And as the last, I guess, his last hurrah, he tried to make some headway with secrecy reform, wrote a book about it, toured the country, and the media just basically didn't pay much attention at all, went nowhere. And so Snowden is an example of somebody so frustrated and so upset over the fact that we continue down a road that we've already gone too far, decided to take draconian action. So he is a whistleblower. I believe, because some of the stuff was illegal. He's a witness, and he is in exile.
So you believe he's legitimate, though? You don't think he's like a PSYOP guy that works for CIA for disinfo?
No, that's not the way it works. You don't end up in a dacha in Russia like that, and you don't have no. He's and there've been others, but he's one of the most famous, and he scared the bejesus out of the military intelligence complex, and because they were afraid others would follow. So there is, as of now, there is enough momentum behind this movement regarding both surveillance and abuse of secrecy, even though it's still not a fully cohesive movement by any means, that the government's feeling pressure.
Yeah, definitely.
And there's enough secrets and enough issues to keep us preoccupied for decades, fine and dandy. I'm only interested in one. The disclosure issue, to me, is the door into the secret empire. It's the only one that we have much of a chance at all of opening.
It's really the only thing that matters, really, because it changes everything. Our whole existence becomes a whole completely different thing once we finally get to unlock that door, and we're given, or whether it's given to us or we have to take it by force some way. Just wow, like that Star Trek life that we were promised, that we've been promised all this time. It will be that much closer.
It's not the only thing that matters. There are plenty of things that are significant, but it is probably the most potent and powerful issue of all of them, even the nuclear secrets. But it's the one that we have traction with. It's the one that has the chances of succeeding. If I was a nuclear bomb secret activist trying to convince the United States to share its nuclear bomb secrets with the rest of the world, I would have zero chance. But the ET issue is probably the most known controversial issue in the world. The term extraterrestrial UFO, including its foreign equivalents, almost has 100% market penetration. Everybody knows what it means.
Yeah.
And of course, huge decades of research by thousands of people have established a massive platform of evidence, which essentially puts a complete lie to the truth embargo, or puts the focus on the truth embargo. So we've almost had a critical mass on a couple of occasions to force the door open, and it still remains the only door we can get through. Once that door is open, I believe that we will see other doors open, and we will have a sea change, and ultimately resulting in the reforming of the intelligence community across the board, and also serious looks at how far the surveillance is going and how far we're going to let it go. And in general, stopping all those abuses, which have turned up in countless movies. I mean, Hollywood is always ahead of the curve when it comes to this
yes,
stuff.
They are.
How many movies have you seen that the fundamental issue in the heart of the movie was abuse of secrecy or abuse of surveillance by the U.S. government? That's not an accident. So that's where we are. And so in that sense, disclosure is even more important. It's not just about ETs or ET tech. It's literally about, can we rebalance the massive complex and its relationship to the U.S. government and the U.S. people that was built in response to the Soviet threat in the late 1940s, their ability to access nuclear weapons, as well as the presence of extraterrestrials confirmed no later than July of 1947.
Yeah, it would be very nice to get, with all this virus stuff and riot crap going on. I mean, has there even really been any new breaks? Is anybody even looking up the last couple weeks? Have you heard of anything interesting coming out?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Over the wire recently?
Yeah, I invite There's no better place to go to just keep abreast of developments in the field in a way that's minimal noise, is to go to paradigmresearchgroup.org,
Right.
which will probably link us up on your site, or just Google my name, Stephen Bassett, and click on resources and go to Print Media Archive. And there you have a fairly comprehensive file of mainstream, relatively mainstream, not fringe or any paranormal media. These are mainstream media, major papers, major networks, etc., on all things UFO ET related. And it's pretty much up to date. I've got a few to add. It goes back all the way to 47. There's 11,000, almost 12,000 articles. And so just checking 2020, you can kind of see what's being covered. And if something is relatively interesting, it'll make it into the mainstream news now because the media is covering this. They have been covering it for a very long time. They just won't investigate it.
Right.
So there have been interesting developments, but they are fully masked by extraordinary political circumstances right now for 3 years, which are unprecedented in my lifetime. And of course, now you added on to that the first global pandemic since 1918. So let's say the ET's backburnered, but it hasn't gone away. The ETs haven't gone away. And so there are various stories that are turning up. There have been a lot of sightings. Some new witnesses are turning up. And there's a number of threads in play. Most of these threads are directly or indirectly connected to the Stars Academy, which was launched by a group of insiders who had left government employ, all national security level, and created that organization and launched it on October 11th of 2017. Almost everything of any note right now is somewhat connected to that. Mm-hmm. And there have been, at this point, over 500 mainstream news articles about TTSA and related issues to that, and the cases they brought forward and so forth. And those are all on the website. Go to paradigmresearchgroup.org, resources, Print Media Archive. Go to the main Print Media Archive, and you can start scrolling backwards, and there's 500 articles about that. And a number of them are this year. But that's where they're going to stay. So the situation right now is that the To the Stars Academy, which launched in October of 2017, which I believe was really supposed to have been launched in October, or rather late 2016, got off to a fast start, put two major stories in play in the New York Times, created quite a bit of stir, and made a presence and raised about $2.5 million, maybe more, money towards a public benefit corporation. And again, started articles were being generated, material was being put out, witnesses are coming forward, and so forth. But it faded, and it put them in an awkward position. I don't think the plan was to come out and then have to sit back for 3 or 4 years.
Right.
But that's because of the political circumstance in America, circa January 21, 2017. There was no way to get this issue into play at a high level. And so they had to stand back and do other things, keeping the ball in the field, but they weren't able to make much headway toward the goal line. They created like the Unidentified series on History Channel, notable, put articles and opinion pieces in the New York Times, Washington Post, and most importantly, began holding private meetings on Capitol Hill to, how would you say, start briefing members of Congress. That they could do, but they were private. Only a couple members have mentioned that they've had these briefings, but apparently there have been quite a few. How many, don't know exactly. All of that's significant. It's laying the groundwork for something.
Right.
And that they could do. Beyond that, nah. We are in the middle of so many crises and semi-crises, and of course the election situation is completely insane. So it's on hold. But don't let that fool you. Given the right circumstances, the disclosure process and disclosure ET issue could explode very quickly.
I kind of hope it does, because I'm getting very bored of the current news cycle. It's been long enough. Everybody knows it's really like the American government really is the only holdout. Canadians and Brits are basically holding back a little bit just because Americans are. It's not like I was going to ask you. Pretty much there should be a break coming up here. Yes, it is. Okay, so we'll be back after the break. There will be a quick clip before we start talking again, Steve.
Okay.
So see you on the other side.
Sure.
Looks like you're doing a fine job. Thank you. Beautiful clock.
My father says that peasants are like the hands of a clock. Round and around they go.
What does that mean?
Because a peasant is no more capable of choosing his own path than the hands of a clock.
Well, who chooses the path for them?
Clockmaker, of course.
And are the members of Rittenhouse the clockmakers?
No one else can do it. Father says monarchies are too selfish and democracies are too chaotic.
So the members of Rittenhouse are not part of, any government?
Not necessarily. Control is all that matters. Usually it's best exercised from the shadows.
What about the people that want a voice and how they're controlled?
Peasants can't govern themselves any more than ants can rule a jungle. Most peasants want nothing more than the illusion of a voice. Father says that's what democracy's for.
Oh.
What you're describing sounds like tyranny disguised as democracy.
Father believes there's no other choice.
What do you believe, John?
No one's ever asked me that before.
All right, so that was a clip from the TV show Timeless. I'm not sure whether it was an NBC. It was probably an NBC show, but I watched it on Netflix. This is a show based on technology that they build and go back in time. It's an interesting show. So we're talking about, with Stephen Bassett here, we're talking about the possibilities of technology, ET tech, that has been kept from us, and the things that we could possibly be doing with it. And we left off, we had just finished talking about Gary McKinnon, and I wanted to bring up just a couple of other people and get your opinion on them. My partner on the Red Pill Roundtable, I have another show from noon till 2 every Wednesday here at Studio A. It's the Red Pill Roundtable. My co-host Scorpio wanted me to ask you about your opinions on Bob Lazar.
Complicated, very complicated thread in the history of the phenomena and exopolitics, without question, as so many are. Keep in mind that everything related to this issue in the government is under embargo.
Right.
And so technically we can't know anything, but sometimes things get out, but also disinformation gets out. And a lot of times that's intentional. So it's really a mess. If science, just regular science, was conducted this way, we'd probably still be in ox carts. The intelligence world operates under different criteria. In other words, one way you win is you lie and mislead and misdirect, and your enemy goes off in the wrong direction and you take over their country, or just stay safe. So Lazar's story got a tremendous amount of attention. It was also extensively covered by a very competent journalist, George Knapp, who's based in Las Vegas. Investigative reporter for KLAS TV for a very long time, highly paid, very competent, and all of his work regarding the ET issue apparently has never in any way threatened his position as a mainstream investigative journalist. He investigated the Tsar extensively, person to person and what have you. And for that, and because he believes that, and has stated a number of times, that the core story is true, it's very difficult for me to dismiss it. There are some kinks in the story, but that is often the case when you're talking about insiders, particularly insiders that are not supposed to be talking at all.
Right.
So I think that if I was pressed, I think the core story of Bob Lazar is true. I believe that there may be some disinformation involved, and it may not be his. It may have been provided to him.
Right.
But if you look at the attention he has gotten from the government since leaving, and it has been extensive, going on for decades now.
Right.
It's difficult for me to imagine that they would pay so much attention to him and send people out to, how would you say, deal with him if he just suddenly made up a story and got some attention from George Knapp. But until the truth embargo is over, Bob Lazar's story will always remain in that controversial basket. But I'll say, and I'll add one last thing, is that story's been in play for a long time, and to my knowledge, he's never changed it.
No, it's not changed at all. Now, when I was talking to Stanton Friedman, rest in peace, Stan, he does not believe Bob at all, and his reasoning is just, it's flawed. It's flawed logic. Like, he's like, well, I'm a nuclear physicist, and they didn't ask me. And it's like, well, they could be they're not going to necessarily look for somebody who's at the top of the class, because those people don't tend to think outside of the box. They're top of the class because they're great at doing what they're told and finishing their work on time and things like that. Somebody like Bob, that guy, he has his own particle accelerator, in his yard. He was building rocket bikes and rocket cars. Of course they would tap someone like that, because they're looking, if it was real and his story is real, they want somebody who can think big. And that would be Bob.
Perhaps. But that may not be the reason they tapped him. It's a murky area. It's a murky world. It's underground. Mm-hmm. It's lit by neon lights. Stan was a very logical man. And so his primary problem with Lazar was that he found certain kinks in the story, and that he felt just weren't resolved, and that for him was enough to put it aside.
Right.
That's going on all the time. There are witnesses coming out, or a story hits, and it gets churned over on the internet and by the researchers, which is fine. It's to be appropriate. And they'll find something, they don't like it, and they'll start passing judgment. It's hoax, fake, whatever, and it may very well be. But Stan made the mistake that a lot of people have made with respect to this issue when it comes to the government insider stuff. And I'm not saying they make it every time, but it's very common. They look at the situation, who the person is, and what they're saying and what the documents say, and they go and they start looking for what would undermine their credibility and try to figure it out.
Right. And
then they'll come in with opinions and criticisms and what have you. When I read these, though, the one thing that is invariably absent in their thinking, in their approach, is an appreciation, understanding, and acceptance of the truth embargo. In other words, if you didn't know better, you would say, okay, this person is researching this subject, and there's no truth embargo. There isn't. Everything is up and up, normal, no shenanigans, no effort to hide the truth, no misinformation. And this is a huge flaw in analysis. The truth embargo is critical to everything related to this subject that connects to the government. So if a former high-level military person is asked, did you do this or say this at such a time, and the person says absolutely not, Without a truth embargo would be, oh, well, okay, honorable person, career, probably true. With a truth embargo, you have no idea. The all the retirees, and there are thousands and thousands of them from all of the agencies and military, intelligence agencies, and of course military services. I don't know how many tens of thousands there are. A significant portion are tangled up in non-disclosure agreements. Mm-hmm. Many of them are lifetime. And so something was said or done many years ago and suddenly gets in play and somebody comes to you and says, well, did this happen? Your answer is no. Your answer can't be, well, I probably shouldn't tell you. I've been under non-disclosure agreement. It's lifelong, but yeah, you're right. No. And so people in the intelligence community have to lie all the time, not because they're evil, but because they are part of the massive intelligence complex, which is built on secrets and sometimes built on offensive efforts to prevent the truth, to embargo the truth. And so Lazar is a perfect example of that. When you consider anything that he has said or been found out about him, you have to view it through the prism of a truth embargo. And the active misinformation, disinformation campaigns that were part of that embargo and still are for 73 years. Once you look through that prism, it's a little easier to possibly come to a comfort level about whether there's some core truth there. That's what I do all the time. I wish more people would pay attention to the truth embargo. By God, I've been trying to push that concept for 23 years now. I obviously need to push harder, but it's central to understanding what is going on. ETs, that's easy. They're here. They go wherever the hell they want.
Yeah,
they're doing a number of things. We know a great deal about what they're doing. Yeah, the minute details, not yet, but we have time. That's pretty straightforward. The truth embargo? Oh my God. It's a riddle wrapped in an enigma inside a box.
Yeah, I know exactly where you're going with that.
It's going to take years to unravel it.
It's just, it's crazy how just like, and well, we should expect it too, right? I mean, we've known about the Brookings report for how long, and that basically said they were never going to tell us if they found anything out.
Yeah, it was that report, that segment of the report was, I believe, a very intentional part of the truth embargo. Mm-hmm. The truth embargo has many, many, many moving parts and a whole bunch of people. Thousands and thousands of people had to stay within certain lines in order for the embargo to be maintained. But remember, it's not an illegal policy. It is national security to the max. And most of everybody working in national security are great people. Not motivated by money, motivated primarily by patriotism. So what they did in the Brookings report, and remember this is, I think, 60? It's way back, is they put out this idea that if the people were told, it would cause a lot of chaos, a lot of disruption, and so forth. They didn't provide any proof or any significant evidence to confirm or make the case. They just basically stated as a matter of fact, certainly it'll cause disruption.
Theory and speculation.
And that message was not to us. That message was intended to get to people working inside government, military, intelligence, right? Military and intelligence. That, hey, guys, look, in case you get the bug, then maybe, it's just, I think, the people should know about this. Understand that it could literally bring chaos down upon society.
You could be responsible for the end of the world.
Exactly. So that was a slick maneuver. Nicely done. I got it. And back then, I doubt anybody would have seen it that way. But to me, it's pretty obvious.
Oh, yeah, but it's a patriot thing, too, right? I mean, you don't question the government. And for the longest time, well, I guess we should have always been questioning the government. But for the longest time, we felt we didn't really have to. We honestly believed they were looking out for our best interests as a whole, humanity, not just one country or just one class of so-called alleged class of people. It's insane the way they've gotten to monopolize all this, mainly because they own all the mainstream media. So what can we do if you try to start your own independent media thing, they're just going to shut it down. So I can see why you're being frustrated too. How are you coping with this? Are you finding it hard to get your message out?
Hell no, there's been over 500 articles written about my work. I got them on my website. You can go look at them. Let me clarify here. It's totally patriotic to question the government. It's not patriotic. It's probably, I would think most people would agree, it's not patriotic to sign up, enlist, enroll, hire on to an intelligence agency or military service, be ready to programs under national security, maybe have secrecy status as well as non-disclosure agreements, and violate them. That's not patriotic on the fundamental level. And now, was Snowden patriotic when he left? Obviously, he did divulge. He did violate agreements. That is something that history will decide. There are points when there are times when you do violate or refuse orders because you feel they're unlawful, or you whistleblow, even though technically you shouldn't under NDA. So people will decide whether Snowden acted patriotically or whether he acted in a criminal way. But fundamentally, the 99% of the people that have worked in the military intelligence complex are not going to violate these arrangements or agreements. The ones that do come forward often are no longer under NDA. Some of them still are, but it's so many years later. And in general, the truth embargo has been weakening for years. It really started to weaken after 2001. And frankly, there's just very few. I'm not aware of any instances now where people who are coming forward, military types, intelligence, are suddenly under a lot of scrutiny on this issue. Now, there have been some other whistleblowers that have been hammered, particularly during the Obama administration, which is a black mark on his administration. He did not support whistleblowers sufficiently. And so but there was a fellow in the CIA came out way back a number of years ago. I'm going to go 10, maybe 9. Chase Brandon, I think his name was Chase Brandon. He'd written a book about Roswell, and he was publicizing it extensively. He had a long career with the CIA, and he went on coast to coast and talked about finding a box of material of interest inside one of the library rooms at the CIA that had things in there related to Roswell that were quite startling. Got a lot of attention. He got a lot of decent press. But I happen to know that not too long after that, the CIA yanked his chain, and I didn't hear from him again. I'm not saying they did anything to him. I'm just saying that he had to step back out of that. He'd gone too far, based upon who he was and his background. So that's that. But that was 9 years ago. The nuclear tampering witnesses, if anybody was going to get harassed or bothered now, it would be the nuclear tampering witnesses, Bob Salas and the rest of the crews. And I'm not aware that they're being bothered at all. And the only reason why that hasn't completely exploded is the Congress is still dysfunctional, has been for some time, and the press will have covered the nuclear tampering issue, but they have not investigated it. And so and I think the press sort of know, boy, if we go there, all hell's going to break loose. So don't go there unless you're ready to go all the way. Mm-hmm. And so the whole issue of the ETs tampering with nuclear weapons around the world, particularly in the U.S., Soviet Union, and UK, is tabled. Now, that's a story and a couple of weeks of congressional hearings. So we're in an interesting place where the fundamental resistance, I think the fundamental energy, the amount of energy behind the truth embargo is really dissipated to bare maintenance, and that the amount of pressure on it is continuing to grow. And so a breakthrough could come in any time, and there's a couple of instances where it almost did break through. But right now, it's step back. You know how you press, you pound and press against the door or the gate to the city, and finally you're just exhausted, you need to step back, rest a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, that's what's happening now. We've gone through this 3-year hiatus in which we're somewhat very limited in what we can do, everybody, not just me, But people far more connected and powerful than I, with more resources than I, are also hindered, but able to do more than I can do and maneuver because they have the contacts and the resources. But overall, we're kind of in suspended animation. And to put a final point on that, from the standpoint of insiders, from the standpoint of national security people, should they, if you were to sit down with them and talk person to person over a couple of vodka tonics or something, and they conveyed to you their thoughts about this, one of the things I think you would probably, if you ask, what you find out is that the military intelligence complex people view the road to disclosure through congressional hearings. They don't see it as some epiphany or whim of a president, any president, certainly our president, to suddenly decide, I think it's time to tell the people, call a press conference. That I think they would view is simply not appropriate and doesn't involve enough of the government. It's too unilateral. So the way is hearings, and that makes total sense. In other words, you start holding some serious hearings with serious witnesses, and there's enough evidence and enough witnesses to fill hearings for months. And there's at least 7 or 8 committees in Congress, which totally appropriate to address this issue. And these hearings will be watched by tens of millions of people. And at some point, it'll be so the energy level and the public interest will be so high that probably then a deal would be struck between the DOD and the White House and even members of Congress. Say, okay, look, I think we pretty much established a platform now. Let's go ahead and announce. That's the way I think the insiders would expect it to happen. But hearings have not happened. In fact, the last one was 1968. There have been a couple of somewhat indirect hearings of no consequence. 1968. Then they shut down Blue Book and basically tried to say, look, we're out of this business. Congress is out of this business. Go away, leave us alone.
Right. Yeah.
And that was 52 years ago. And there have been a number of efforts to get hearings, and they've all been cut off. I know of a few. I've been told of others. So essentially, Congress is out of the game. That's not hard to do. They've been out of the game, period. So no hearings. So right away, you've got a real block, a real barrier in the way of moving forward in this in a what I call a responsible and appropriate fashion, which is why the TTSA is holding all these private meetings on the Hill. They're preparing for that possibility in the foreseeable future. All right. But I'll finish with this. This, of course, is the reason why, when I was fortunate enough to get a lot of funding from a brilliant progressive supporter to hold a citizen hearing on disclosure, which I originally wanted to do as early, I think, 2002, 2001. I didn't have the money, anything close to the money. And suddenly I had it, late 2012. And so what the citizen hearing on disclosure was a mock congressional hearing held in Washington at the National Press Club, which cost a lot more money. I could have done it at a local hotel and saved $50,000 at least.
Right.
At the main ballroom, the National Press Club, 3 blocks from the White House. And we paid for 42 witnesses to come in. Most of them were flown in for a full week in Washington, D.C. at a top hotel. Put them up. And we also paid quite a bit of money for the services of 6 former members of Congress to hear their testimony in a hearing-like fashion. Groups of 4 and 5, 2 sessions in the morning, 2 sessions at night, a lecture in the evening, just for the hell of it, over 5 days. It was 30 hours of testimony. This was a major event, and it was fully filmed. The point, there were several reasons why I did it, but first was to hold a hearing, mock hearing. We also, for not much money, allowed people to listen on net. In other words, watch it on net, stream it. Not only that, but we streamed it out in at least 4 languages: English, French, Japanese, and one other. So anybody in Washington, D.C., worked on the Hill, any journalist at the Washington Post, whatever, who were not going to be caught dead down there at the hearings, right, sitting in the audience, could watch it from the safety of their office. And we have no idea how many did, but many I'm sure did. And so this was a message to the Congress and to everybody working in Washington. This is what a hearing would kind of look like. These are the kind of witnesses that would show up. These are the kind of questions that would logically be asked. Look how well it went. Look how well it was received. Look how solid these witnesses were. And the idea was, hey, kind of get this idea in play. And then the idea after that was to deliver all of the entire hearing testimony in a DVD set to every member of Congress, and then launch a political initiative regarding the presidential campaign. That was the plan. And by and large, that's the way the plan went. The DVDs were delivered a little later than I thought would happen, but early enough in November of 2014. The event itself did not have the impact I would have liked. It got media coverage. But unfortunately, and this happens often, not too long before the event, a major event, another event took place that just took the Washington media right out of town, and they were gone. It was Boston. It was the Boston Marathon bombing. Massive story. Probably took half or more of the coverage we might have gotten away. So, okay, but still, we have the full record of it. It's been on the internet for years. It's out there. It's never going to go away. And then I delivered the set and then launched the political initiative. So that wraps up my thinking on the hearings. I've done what I can do, but there's more I can do. So far, I've made some contributions, but I have some plans to, over the next 6 months, do what I can do as PRG to lay the groundwork for the hearings, which I think inevitably or most likely will come before we do get a formal announcement from the president, unless the president were to act very, very unilaterally, which could be...
Well, that's fantastic. I think we're probably starting the music now.
Okay.
I'll do everything I can to help you out with that, and we'll be back on the other side of the break. There will be another quick clip. Not quite hearing it yet, but it should be any second. There we go.
NASA has partnered with Robert Bigelow, who's an unconventional figure in the aerospace world. He's more at home on the Vegas Strip than at America's space agency, and he's obsessed with aliens and UFOs. In the spring of last year, he and NASA carried out an historic test to prove his high-flying technology is ready to support humans in space.
So now we're looking for a new era that says, all right, how can we now shape this to where it's more accessible for a lot more folks at a lot less cost and still have safety and reliability at the same time? Witnessing those explosions in the 50s and 60s, you weren't aware of the ultimate ramifications of those kinds of things, but there was a real strong feeling of energy and a secretiveness and so forth, and it was cool.
He told us this is where his grandparents had a close encounter with a UFO.
It really sped up and came right into their face and filled up the entire windshield of the car. And it took off at a right angle and shot off into the distance.
That story sparked his obsession and explains the alien looking out from the side of Bigelow Aerospace.
Do you believe in aliens?
I'm absolutely convinced. That's all there is to it.
Do you also believe that UFOs have come to Earth?
There has been and is an existing presence, an ET presence. And I've spent millions and millions. I probably spent more as an individual than anybody else in the United States has ever spent on this subject.
Is it risky for you to say, in public that you believe in UFOs and aliens?
I don't care.
You don't worry that some people will say, did you hear that guy? He sounds like he's crazy.
I don't care.
Why not?
It's not going to make a difference. It's not going to change reality of what I know.
Do you imagine that in our space travels we will encounter other forms of intelligent life?
You don't have to go anywhere.
You can find it here.
Yeah.
All right. right, so that was a clip of Robert Bigelow. I just want to remind listeners that we are 100% listener supported, which means we can talk about whatever the hell we want, whenever the hell we want, as often as we want, but we do need a little bit of help to be able to pay the bills. So if you could scroll down to come to revolution.radio or freedomslips.com, scroll down to the Patreon button and become a patron, or you can go to the store. I believe it's Zazzle.com and Zazzle.ca. You can order shirts and mugs and mouse pads and all kinds of very cool things. Stephen, what do you think about that? I would love to hear the full unedited interview of the things he had to say. You know, they took like a 2 or 3 hour talk with that guy and whittled it down to 2 minutes. What do you have to say about Robert Bigelow?
I don't know how long the initial interview was. That's 2 hours seems like a lot. I doubt that. I'm sure they interviewed him for a decent amount of time, and they did some edits. But that was a major event in the history of the disclosure movement, without question. I don't have access to Bob Bigelow, so I've not talked with him about it. I don't know if he's been asked a lot about it, but based on what happened, my assessment, and that's what it is, assessment, is this was a planned, intentional statement from him, and it was deliberate. And it was connected to the Stars Academy.
Right.
So, and I think it was May, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was May, around there, of 2017. Bigelow almost certainly knew that later that year, the To the Stars Academy was going to launch. He was involved in the ATIP program, which they. Obviously, one of the first things they did after launching in December was provide the ATIP story to Advanced Aerospace Identification Program story to the New York Times. He was involved in that. So almost certainly he knew the plan, the game plan. He's not a member of the To the Stars Academy, but he's clearly part of the program that they talked about and connected to the issue going back decades. So he knows that they're going to launch. Okay, fine. All right. But he also knows something else. Which has been confirmed, that all of these careerists from DOD, CIA, Lockheed Martin Aerospace, Advanced Aerospace, I forget the name, the Skunk Works,
right.
all were under NDAs, and that they were going to be limited. Whatever clearance their supporters with inside the DOD, Department of Defense, provided for them so they could do what they're doing. And we have no information about that. We do not have any hard information about the origin story within the DOD that helped set all of this up. And some of the origin may have also been in the CIA. We just know that it happened. And I assure you, without some support with inside the military intelligence complex, it doesn't happen. So he knew that they were hamstrung. I say hamstrung. There were limits. They could do this, but there were things they could not say, and they had to be careful. And they certainly couldn't break any NDA agreements. So, and that's exactly what happened. And they've acknowledged it. They've acknowledged repeatedly there's a number of things they simply cannot discuss, even though they're looking to advance the issue in major ways and multiple programs and all that because of their NDAs. And then they have gone to great lengths to avoid, though at times very difficult, outright saying, this is an extraterrestrial phenomenon, or there's extraterrestrials here. They say right up to the line. This has happened repeatedly, but they don't cross the line. Okay, and that's, I believe, the deal for now that they had to. Are obligated to in October 2017, and are still obligated to 3 years later. And I think Bigelow knew that. Okay, but Bob Bigelow does not work for the directly for the United States intelligence community.
No.
He's a contractor with NASA. And he may have NDAs, but those NDAs would be related to NASA work. And so he is not limited with respect to the ATIP program, I believe, or at least he's not limited with respect to the full range of things that Elizondo and others were limited to. And so when 60 Minutes, I think, approaches him logically because of the test on the of his space habitat system, the very first test on the International Space Station. It's a big deal. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent, and now they're going to test it on the ISS. Huge. And it succeeded. Mm-hmm. And so this was a good time to interview Bigelow, no problem. I don't think there was any connection on 60 Minutes' part. But the way that works, the high-level interview, is they will give you an idea of the areas they're going to talk to you about. They're going to ask you about. They just don't show up and spitball it. They don't just send you a list of questions. That would be quite unusual. That's not that high journalism doesn't do that. But they give you a sense so that you have time to reflect on these areas, and then you can give them solid answers, and you don't have to sit around and stare at each other. So no problem. So there's no question that they let him know that they were going to ask him about his interest in the ET subject, and the UFO subject.
Right.
Which naturally was the last thing they showed. Now, that may not have been the last thing it may have been chronologically last in their interviews, but it's always going to be the last thing in the program. It's always going to be the last thing at the end of the interview. And so he knew that was coming. He had probably months to decide how he was going to handle that question. And there's 1,000 ways that he could have responded to those questions. Limited, not limited, what have you.
What I wouldn't give to be a fly on his wall, you know.
Sure, I'd pay anything to have dinner with Bob Bigelow. Point is that what he did was stare her right in the face and say, "There's an extraterrestrial presence here." And then,
we don't have to leave; it's already here.
Yeah, and that was basically the second follow-up. So basically, he said it twice, and he was emphatic about it. It was a marker put down for history, but it was something else. You see, Bigelow knew that obviously he was going to be outed when the TTSA was launched and the stories were provided in the New York Times, and ATIP story was covered, and he was going to be outed as being part of it.
Right.
Okay, fine. So what he did in May, 4 or 5 months before, 5-6 months before the New York Times article, is that he did what none of the guys in the TTSA and the woman could do. He said, matter-of-factly, there's extraterrestrials here.
Yeah.
So when the TTSA launches and those stories break, the reporters could put two and two together. None of the TTS guys could say this, but he's not under NDA. He was involved in the ATIP program. He says they're here, which means that Louis Elizondo and Hal Puthoff and Chris Mellon and Herman Kahn and et cetera, every damn one of them knows there's an extraterrestrial presence. But they're unable to say that. They weren't able to say it then. And as things developed subsequent to the New York Times articles, could not say it. And that's where we are right now.
That's probably why he started laughing during the interview, because he's like, I could just say this and everybody else would be like, oh, no, I'm going to lose my job. And what's the press going to say?
It was a laugh of acknowledgement of how cool it was.
Yeah.
It's a very special kind of laugh. And to give you an idea of how suspended we are, meaning that, I don't know, it's like that film Cut where there's a bunch of things kind of moving and suddenly they freeze frame, right? While they're in free fall. We're suspended like particles in an aerosol spray. To give you an idea, March of this year, Bigelow laid off all of the employees at Bigelow Aerospace. The operation that was working on the habitat that was featured in the May 2017 interview. Because, hey, we're all just on temporary leave. And so I assure you the ET issue is in the same boat. And it's a question of when will things start up again. There are two fundamental vectors here. One is the pandemic, and the other is the political situation. The pandemic needs to resolve to a place where we can move forward, and the political situation needs to resolve so we know what the hell is going to happen. Then you could see some rapid, dramatic developments. But it's been very tough for me. I don't have the kind of resources some of these other people have, and so the last 3 years have been pretty tough.
Yeah, this pandemic's really messed with a lot of people, a lot of incomes, and just a lot of everything. I mean, like there are people. Everything was going so great, then all of a sudden we've got like the Spanish flu and the Great Depression in the same friggin' year. Like, wow.
Well, I wouldn't want to trade places with the boys from 2018-19. Can you imagine being part of one of the dirtiest, ugliest, filthiest, disgusting wars of all time? Trench warfare, and actually, say you're a front line. I'm not talking about, in a frontline person. You're out there, and managing to survive that filth, the disease, the bombardments, the machine guns, and you get back and die of the Spanish, the flu, right? It didn't come
the flu.
Spain, right?
That's what it is. The numbers show it's actually weaker than the flu. This COVID is weaker than the flu.
No. Whoa. The Spanish flu was not a corona. It was just an extremely lethal version of flu. I think it was H1N2, whatever the hell, killed huge number of people. I'm just saying that I wouldn't want to trade places with those guys.
Right. I
mean, to survive World War I and then die of this flu. I mean, my God. So we have got it easy. But COVID-19 is not the flu. It's a coronavirus of a particular type that's extremely infectious with a reasonable kill rate. And it's going to kill far, far more times what the flu kills before it's over. And it's if you're my age, you don't want to get it. I mean, I'm following it very closely. I'm watching all the posts, the controversies, the critics, and all that stuff. I get it. I'm not shy about giving an opinion, though I'm not an epidemiologist, only because I got time on my hands. I watch hundreds of hours of news, read articles, review the debates, and I just say, hey, this is not the flu. Don't screw with it. Don't get it, because I don't want any of my supporters to die from it. Right? I'm just trying to be helpful here. But ultimately, everybody makes their own decision. But there is a huge amount of disinformation on the internet because everything's been politicized. And so the internet is like a river of hyper-partisanship, slander, libel, fraud.
The Smith-Mundt Act really didn't help very much. It made it legal for the State Department to lie to us. So, I mean, just about anything that comes out on the news can be theater now.
True. One of the most significant impacts of the truth embargo and the ET issue is it has contributed greatly towards undermining trust in government.
Right.
And one of the reasons for this is that the government lied to us about Vietnam, and as a result, a lot of people died.
Mm-hmm.
And we learned about those lies.
Yeah.
And not much happened. I mean, not much happened, but we did learn about them. The government lied about Iraq. I say the government. Some part of the government. In this case, it was kind of a mixture of politicians and some intel about Iraq, and a lot of people died. What's different about the truth embargo is in order to maintain the truth embargo, the government needs to lie to the American people every single day.
Yeah.
They have for 73 years. In other words, they got to get up in the morning every day, prepared to lie, in one way or another, about the truth embargo. 73 years times, 365? What is that, 21,000 days of lies? That is like a drop of water on a rock. You get enough drops of water, and it'll literally cut right through the rock.
Exactly.
And so, on the most important issue in the world. So that has had a dent in trusting government, which is extremely low. In fact, it's dangerously low, critical low. in the United States. It's like white cell count. If your white cell count gets too low, bad things happen to you. Well, if the trust level in government gets too low in a country, bad things can happen. And we have been operating in the danger zone for a long time. Trust levels at this in the past would have resulted in revolutions, overthrows, coups, God knows what. But we are still a relatively structured, relatively functioning representative government, a republic. And so far, we haven't had that. But I'm telling you, boy, we're pushing the limit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's something's got to come to a head. I'm just hoping it's going to be common sense. Well, and like I say, you know what? They could end all of this crap right now if they just said, hey, guys, look up in the skies. Okay, it is real. They are there. We've got some tech. Here's one of them.
Yeah, sure. It's that simple. The actual thing that we want, the prize for this movement, and again, this is not the disclosure movement, a term that kind of got generated by between me and Stephen Greer. I forget who went first. Could have been him. Doesn't matter. Back in the early aughts. But disclosure movement is not as well structured as, say, the civil rights movement, gay rights movement, women's rights movement, women's vote, all that stuff. It's not that structured. It's a very difficult movement to structure in for a number of reasons. So it's somewhat loose, which has helped the truth embargo to continue to exist. So when the government continues this embargo, we're paying a heavy price. But the prize, and every major political movement has to have a prize. There is a very excellent documentary series called Eye on the Prize, and it's about the civil rights movement. And what was the prize for the civil rights movement? It was the Civil Rights Act, plus the Voting Rights Act, but the Civil Rights Act was the key. That was the prize. That had to happen. Now, gay rights, same thing. The suffrage movement, that was really easy. I need an amendment allowing women to vote. That's a simple prize. If you don't have a prize in a movement, then people don't know where they're going. They don't have a goal. Yeah. It's like running a marathon when you have no idea when, in fact, there's going to be a goal line. There may not be. You may just run and run, right?
Yeah. You just described life, my friend.
Exactly. So what's the prize? The prize is disclosure. How simple is it? Disclosure is nothing more than the announcement when it comes. The announcement from the head of state, not from a journalist, not from a bird colonel at the Pentagon, but from the president, backed up undoubtedly by support, evidence, and other matters that would be appropriate. That's disclosure. That statement, the moment those words come out of the president or the prime minister's mouth, whoever goes first, disclosure has happened right then. A lot more happens after that. So the prize is very, very simple. But getting to that moment where a head of state can say those words, well, we've been working toward there for 73 years. And we know a lot more about the obstacles. We have a much better understanding about the way to go. We have a much different public awareness. We have a lot more witnesses available that are actually available. So, again, we're moving there. But it's still tough. And we're not there yet, obviously.
Yeah, I think we really do need to do something to step it up, and it's kind of convenient with this vaccine. There were so many people like yourself and myself that had plans, even other celebs and other people that I just know that had plans to restart their life, new businesses, new jobs, everything, all shut down. And it's a good way to keep people from getting together and talking about these things. But then there's the backside, like this station, Revolution Radio. I think we've got more listeners now than we've had in a long time, simply because of this. People have time to listen to these things again.
Yeah, there's some positive coming from this. Everybody taking a break developing media. I'm developing a podcast. It'll start very soon called The Disclosure Wire. Got the website up, Facebook page is up. I'm learning editing software. It'll happen pretty soon. So I'll have a podcast. Everybody has a podcast now. There's 500 million podcasts, whatever. So we're making progress. But the pandemic is a black swan event, but it was inevitable. It's been predicted for decades.
Yeah.
And we weren't fully ready for it. I mean, we're ready for a nuclear attack. That's for damn sure. And spades, but we weren't ready for a pandemic. And so we're paying a heavy price for that. But let me be clear. If we hadn't done at least what we did, in other words, if the actions that were taken, which were taken too late, had not been taken, if we had, for whatever reason, I mean, it's a much smaller country, it's a much easier call, Sweden decided to try to go herd immunity, we would probably have 500,000 deaths by now, maybe more, and major hospital systems across the country would have crashed. It would have been total chaos. There had been dead bodies in the halls, and huge numbers of nurses, doctors, and MT people would have caught the disease, and many of them died. It would have been a catastrophe. So people say, here's what happened, what's the problem? I'm going, wait a minute, no. What happens if we don't do what we did? And that's not hard to calculate. They've got the math down real well. They can tell you how many, if you didn't do this, then that would have happened. It would have been a huge number. Brazil actually procrastinated more than the U.S. Brazil's leader is an autocrat and not particularly stable. He refused to comply, refused to do anything. In fact, he actively suppressed efforts to deal with it. And Brazil is now equal to the United States in per capita. They have about half the population of the U.S. and they have half the deaths at 1 million, and they're just getting started. Brazil could very well collapse as a country within 6 months. It's a catastrophe. So again, I ask people to be thoughtful about when they read stuff on the net about this. Consider the source, view multiple sources before you make decisions about what you're going to do with your life, because this is the real deal. This is not some made-up device by the government to keep you from having lunch at your favorite restaurant, I can assure you.
Well, I definitely believe there's a lot more going on than we're being told. That's for sure. There are people that are taking advantage of this pandemic. Now, I myself have an autoimmune disease, and I know people that are seniors. I'm 50 myself. My mother and father are in their 70s, so I totally get it. But yet things would be a lot worse had we not stopped, shut down the airports and influx. The problem here in Canada was Justin Trudeau's been bringing people in the whole time. He hasn't stopped bringing people in. So
all I can say is look at the numbers.
Yeah,
the SIT map.
Okay, see you guys on the other side of the.
You know, if you were to follow a busy doctor as he makes his daily round of calls, you'd find yourself having a mighty busy time keeping up with him. Time out for many men of medicine usually means just long enough to enjoy a cigarette. And because they know what a pleasure it is to smoke a mild, good-tasting cigarette, they're particular about the brand they choose. In a repeated national survey, doctors in all branches of medicine, doctors in all parts of the country were asked, "What cigarette do you smoke, doctor?" Once again, the brand named most was Camel. Yes, according to this repeated nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Why not change to Camels for the next 30 days and see what a difference it makes in your smoking enjoyment? See how Camels agree with your throat. See how mild and good-tasting a cigarette can be.
Camels. Good times, good times. All right.
Thanks for those who stuck around. I am here with my special guest, Stephen Bassett from the Paradigm Research Group. You can check out his site at paradigmresearchgroup.org. He's been on a lot of shows, too. I'm sure some of you already know that. He's been on Ancient Aliens, Project Blue Book, Classified Files, Hangar 1, Sightings, Unexplained Files, UFOs Declassified, UFOs Lost at Unsealed Alien Files. That was my favorite show. That's where I saw you the most on. You could also hear him on shows like Fade to Black with Jimmy Church and Richard Dolan. Spaced Out Radio, which is right here on Revolution Radio and Studio B. And so we are back. Stephen, how are you doing, buddy? Oh, you're still muted, Stephen.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. It happens all the time.
Sure, no problem. Well, on the break, I did a quick check. As of today, Canada is running 226 COVID-19 deaths per million population, and the U.S. is running 363 per million population. So Canada is obviously been able to do a little better. Well, it's a significant amount better so far. But I'm afraid that the U.S. is about to have a pretty big spike. So you can expect that number to go up, perhaps. These are big numbers, and we're not over this. It's going to last through the summer because of certain policies and other actions, and then it'll still be going when the flu season starts in September, October. So again, I don't know what the numbers are going to be come next February, but 500,000 is certainly not out of the question.
Well, I would certainly advise listeners to make sure you're slowly stocking up on things. Don't go panic buying like you did before, so nobody's got toilet paper anymore. But definitely stock up on things you're going to need if this happens again. I'm hoping you're wrong because I'm a grandfather and father, and it's sad to me. I see my grandson; he's 3 years old. He should be able to I'm watching these kids are at the park, but they're not allowed to play on the friggin' things there. They're not allowed to be in the splash pad. It's nuts to me. But you know what? That subject is actually kind of. I just quit smoking a few days ago, too, so I'm trying not to
A lot of people, I understand, have quit. This was a highly motivating thing.
It really is, yeah. It definitely, well, especially being back on radio, too. I want to have a better sounding voice, and hacking up along every other word is not very good radio. Okay, there was something else I wanted to talk, because we're very like-minded when it comes into the things we're willing to believe when it comes to the ET stuff. Mm-hmm. What do you think about Billy Meyer?
Well, it's probably the most complicated contact case on record. I mean, it's just... it's off the charts. I don't use it as part of my work because I'm an activist. My job, I'm not a researcher. My job is not to prove this case or that case. It's to take the collective body of evidence and try to advance a political resolution. The Meyer case is so complicated that it's like I can't address it. I have no idea what's real, what's not. Complicated history. There are so many other contact cases that are fairly straightforward that we've learned a lot of information from. Hundreds of thousands of cases have been reported, perhaps as many as 1 million. And hundreds and hundreds of those have been actually written up. The rest are sitting in files that one day could be cataloged, but that's a very expensive project. We don't have the money for that. So the Meyer case is an outlier. Who the hell knows?
There was an interesting. It was on Prime. I wish I could remember the name of it, but it was Wendell Stevens had spent a lot of time over there, and he took a few people with him. They did a little documentary. They did do some testing, and the clips for the testing they were able to do back then, it showed that they couldn't prove any kind of fraud. So I found that to be interesting, especially the audio and the metal, especially. They couldn't figure out what that was. So that was a head scratcher for me. The pictures, I don't know, man. They were hard for me to wrap my brain around. They just looked too good, but too much like everybody says, cake pans or something.
It's the disclosure process is moving forward just nicely, whatever the truth of the Meyer case is. It doesn't have an impact on disclosure at this point. It's not relevant. And I leave it to others. They can research it as much as they like. But
right.
I can't have what I would call certainly a defined opinion on it. I just don't.
Have you, what do you think about Project Bluebeam and the possibilities of that?
I've been asked that question many times. It's an interesting idea. I'm not surprised it's in play. Its origins are not clear, but it doesn't matter. The idea of a potential false flag with respect to ET issue is a legitimate concern. The governments do false flags. They have an ancient history. Hell, the burning of Rome by Nero might have been if he did it, might have been one of the earliest examples of a false flag. It's nasty business, and the governments almost always get away with it. Well, I think would they try to pull that here? It's unlikely, and the reason I give is always pretty much the same. This is a different world, different time. It's one thing if they blew up the Maine in order to start that war. What can you do? Hey, Maine blew up, sunk. Turns up in an article in the papers back here. Let's go to war. Fine. Now, the majority of the people of the planet have computers and access to the internet. Hundreds of millions, billions actually, have cell phones. Communication is global, instantaneous. Websites can be translated. You can go to somebody's website in Ukraine and translate it into English that's reasonably readable. And so you try to pull a stunt at that level, not some local, small, false event, but something of this magnitude. You'll have 1 billion people picking everything and looking at everything related to it within minutes. And they will go after it. And I don't think that an event like that could even begin to withstand what would happen. Not to mention the fact that there would be an awful lot of people in government that would absolutely be appalled at trying to do this. I think you'd have whistleblowers coming out from multiple sources. It's just too big. It would be a crime against humanity at a level I can't hardly measure. To create a false flag related to ETs, making them the enemy, and then launching a worldwide, massive, multi-trillion-dollar defensive campaign that can't possibly succeed, thus resulting in the deaths of God knows how many people because lack of resources. It would be the worst crime against humanity in the history of the human race. That's Absolutely. How big deal it is. So I don't expect that any group inside government is going to have the cojones to put that together and actually try to pull it off. Not now, not in 2021.
I hope you're right, because I mean, I would like disclosure, but I really don't want to be killed just to get it.
What you need, again, we need to get in the truth business here in America real soon, virtually at almost every level. If we don't get in the truth business, we're going to continue to have some very uncomfortable times. We tried literally to run the nation on secrecy and lies across multiple institutions for years. Guess what? It's not working. People aren't cooperating. Trust in government's defected, is deflated. We got to turn this around. We got to get in the truth business in all areas. And I think that's what the people want. They've made it very clear that's what they want. And increasingly, they're punishing liars. it's becoming increasingly costly to lie for personal gain in the public arena. So maybe that's the beginning, but that is one of at the core of American reform would be a truth renaissance. God knows there's 1,000 reforms that are needed, but at the core, at the center, is a truth renaissance. If you have the truth, you can make the best decisions. If you don't, the chances are you can't make a good decision at all.
Exactly.
So the truth makes things. It doesn't guarantee perfection. It doesn't guarantee happiness. It just gives you the best chance for functional outcomes.
You can actually make an informed decision. We haven't been able to make an informed decision for decades, as far as I'm concerned, because of this embargo.
Well, certainly in terms of the ET issue, yeah, of course. But we've made ill-informed decisions about war. Hal Kennedy lied about the strength of the Soviet nuclear arms, helped get him elected.
Well, but that's the point, though. Like, if we knew about all of this other stuff, those things wouldn't have been issues, because we wouldn't have been thinking on this little primal, global, let's beat each other warfare crap up. We would have been thinking bigger about going out to the stars, like a lot sooner. You know, we would have had these things. And if everybody had them, you know, like it's kind of like a mutually assured destruction thing, or everybody's armed, there's a lot less chance that you're going to start shooting each other. I mean, that may be, you know where I'm going with that anyway. Yeah. We would have had, things would have been so different in everything if we'd had that disclosure.
I recently watched the final season of The Man in the High Castle.
I was going to bring that up. Cool. What did you think of it?
If I had the time, who knows? Maybe I will. I don't know. I've got so many things I need to do, and I'm really, I'm a guy who has high inertia. That's why I guess I've pretty much been working with myself. I don't employ well. Point is that I would write a book about an alternative history in which the events at Roswell play out differently, and the word doesn't get back to Truman fast enough. And as a result, before Ramey can hold the second press conference, a couple of days go by, and the reporters all get to Roswell and start interviewing people all over town. And the result is that the ET president gets announced in August of 1947. And just what happens after that? The alternative history. No one knows. And you can make a case that it would have been a catastrophe. You can make a case it would have been extraordinary, a better path. And we'll never know. But what I can say is that one can make a reasonably good case. It would make for a wonderful debate on some fine college stage, you know, if one would invite me to come, and I assure you they don't. But to debate somebody or talk about in a dialogue about what it would be like if we'd had the announcement in 1947, how would history have played out? And I make a pretty good case that it would have been very different, and we'd be in much better shape today. Because the path we did take was catastrophic. For 44 years, the underlying platform to civilization was called mutual assured destruction. Probably one of the most appropriate acronyms in the history of acronyms. That was it. You got up in the morning and you go, there's a pretty good chance that I'll still be alive by bedtime because mutual assured destruction is operational today. That was it for 44 years. Actually, we're still living under mutual assured destruction.
Yep.
It's just that it's not in a Cold War context. It's in a post-Cold War context, and it's marginal as to whether it's even post. This is, of course, insanity. I think the millennials know that too. I mean, to them, they don't have this history. They look at this stuff and go, "You people out of your minds." But that's it. Mutual assured destruction. That is our platform. And we've spent since forget World War II. I've tried to get a number on how many trillions of dollars in current money the world has spent on war, defense, military, and intelligence since 50, say, and it's a big number. 100 trillion certainly is in play. Could be higher than that. Could be 120, 130 trillion dollars. All money that could have been spent on food, housing, clothing, research, development, human resources, so forth. Spent on war, military, intelligence, spying, defense, right? Whatever do you call it? 130 trillion dollars in 2020 money. Think about that. And what did it get us? Nothing. It maintained a mutual assured destruction, which meant nothing happened. Of course, if we had taken that path, nothing would have happened. And so, I would love to have that discussion. So, history is long, and what's different about modern history is that the mistakes you could make in the modern times are so much bigger than the ones you could make in ancient times, right? It's like, it's not our fault. I mean, if it was 3,000 years ago, somebody could screw up and, I don't know, lose a battle or maybe a city or something like that. Now, we're living in a world where there's dozens and dozens of ways somebody could launch a nuclear war tomorrow. EMP attack. It all keeps coming down to the same thing. We live on a stage called mutual assured destruction. And the ETs, of course, are fully aware of this. And so most of the witnesses to nuclear weapons tampering events, going all the way back to the 60s, most of them are convinced this is they're not showing off. They're not threatening us. This is their way, since apparently they're not going to put any advertisements in the New York Times. This is their way of saying, what in the hell do you think you are doing?
Yeah.
All right. And I believe that is true. So what in the hell are we doing? How much, this Cold War, mutual assured destruction, all that stuff, how many times does that come up in the presidential campaign this year? How many times did it come up in the last presidential campaign? What, they have 36 debates, 100 candidates? How many times did it come up? No, it's not even discussed. It's like we take it for granted. We live every day on the edge of annihilation, and that's the norm. Accept it and shut up.
Exactly.
And here's some bullshit, so elect us. We can't keep that up. Right? The truth about the risks that we face is a truth we have to have. We don't have it. Recently, this really, I was reading an email from Christopher Mellon. It was either an email or it was an article he wrote in response to something else. And I was thunderstruck. I may get this out there. I haven't decided yet, but I may. He happened to mention, I don't know if he even thought about it, he happened to mention that there was, during his career, he was informed, I mean, he was high involved in with the committees, intelligence committees, high-level positions, that they were informed that a terrorist group had smuggled a nuclear weapon into Washington, D.C. And I read that, and I went, are you kidding me? He didn't say we were given a false report, but rather we were informed that they had smuggled a nuclear weapon into D.C., and he had nothing more to say. I don't think that he wanted to write that, and I'm not totally surprised at all about that, as a matter of fact. But I'm shocked that somebody that had his career said it, and maybe it was one of those subconscious slips. Because I assure you, if the terrorists were to smuggle a nuclear weapon into Washington, D.C. area, you would not be told. I mean, we would not be told.
You wouldn't know.
And I'm 3 blocks from the White House. Because if you did say anything, people would all want to leave.
Yeah.
And even if you found the silly bomb, hell, the real estate values wouldn't recover for a decade. You can't panic people, right? In other words, you'll learn about that bomb when it goes off. and
Exactly.
this is the state of affairs in America because of the Cold War, because of the nuclear threat, and because of the ET presence. Now, there are people that are quite happy with that. In other words, I don't want to know. I had a friend once say that he doesn't want to know if he has cancer or not. If nobody tells him anything, he'll live longer. There are people who don't want to know. Good for them. But I say good for them. No, that's their opinion. Fine. But if we continue to run the show that way, the costs are going to be rather staggering, right? Lewis Black has a skit or a riff in one of his comic routines. Lewis Black is incredible.
He's funny.
Him.
Yeah.
He's doing a riff on the Iraq War and Dick Cheney. And finally he gets to the end kind of this particular riff, and he's saying, he says, so they came back and they said there were no weapons of mass destruction, which of course was a massive political, fiasco, and of course upset a lot of people. And he said, I can't believe it. I can't believe they said that. You're telling me they couldn't have found it? You just go in your inventory, get a nuclear bomb, strap it to a camel, take a picture of it, say we found the weapons of mass destruction. In other words, they lied. They knew there were no weapons of mass destruction, or they did not have enough proof to justify that war. So they basically lied us into that war, which is a catastrophe. But then when they didn't find the nuclear weapons, for whatever reason, they didn't lie about that. They could have easily cooked up a lie on that. And I, to this day, don't know exactly why, except that if they... Well, let me put it this way.
Well, you know what? Maybe that was part of the Smith-Mundt thing. Remember when they did the update, when Obama was it the NDAA thing? That was part of it. It was broadened to expand like the entire state department, like every state or something like that. So that may have been why. Maybe because there was some technicality, and then after 9/11, they were able to address that, and so now it's. All gloves off, and they can just do what they want, and we really have to be careful and very discerning.
Yeah, of course. I mean, they had the latitude, and they took advantage. It's very possible, though, that once the war was underway, and they're out there looking for those weapons, the risk of concocting a second lot and getting some people together to somehow come up with some weapons that you would label mass destruction weapons and say, hey, see, we found them, would have been extremely high because the tension was riveted, right, on the developments inside Iraq. Journalists were everywhere. So ultimately, I think they may have decided, we can't risk it. Let's just tell the truth. Couldn't find it. And that's what gave Lewis Black finish with, strap a bomb on a camel. This is all funny except for the hundreds of thousands of people that are dead.
Well, yes, of course.
Countries destroyed, disruption, trillions of dollars down the drain. So who wants more of this? What American, if they were really properly informed, would want more of this? Is it, without getting into all of the little defects in American society and the problems we have some problems, we have some strengths, we have weaknesses, and so forth. I get that. We're better than some countries in some things, not as good in others. But at the center of it all, who wants more of this institutional lying at the highest level that involves hundreds of thousands of people dying and trillions of dollars being spent based on lies? Who wants that? And who is prepared to step forward to try to stop it?
That's a damn good question. Anyone who tries gets smacked down.
Less so now. I've never been bothered in 23 years, but then I'm not a big fish. I'm small potatoes. But overall, we can break through on this, and we can break through on the truth issue and the trust issue.
Oh, you know what? We are at the end of the show, my friend. It's gone by awesome. This was Stephen Bassett. Go to his site, paradigmresearchgroup.org. Thanks to everybody who listened. Stephen, you're great. See you guys.